What if the biggest environmental breakthrough of our lifetime doesn't come from a new technology, but from changing the way we think about trash? Because garbage, as we know it, is a surprisingly modern invention. And my guest today has dedicated his life to proving that waste is not inevitable. Tom Szaky, founder and CEO of TerraCycle, has built a global movement around one radical idea that with enough curiosity, creativity, and purpose, we can eliminate the very concept of waste. And along the way, he offers a powerful lesson for all of us, not just about sustainability, but about fear, entrepreneurship, parenting, and what becomes possible when we stop asking, why can't this work? And start asking, how does the game actually work? Enjoy the show. Welcome to Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan. This show is all about bringing hope, connection, awareness, and wisdom through meaningful conversations that inspire us to be better versions of ourselves and have a positive impact on humanity. This is your space to pause, reflect, and reconnect with who you are, what you care about, and who you want to be. We have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. Today, I am speaking with someone who cares deeply about having a positive impact on humanity, Tom Szaky. Tom is the founder and CEO of TerraCycle, a global leader in the collection and repurposing of hard-to-recycle waste, now operating across 21 countries. A dorm room composting project at Princeton compelled Tom to leave school at 19 and build a multinational enterprise on a mission to eliminate the very idea of waste. By 2006, Inc. magazine named him the #1 CEO under 30. And in 2019, he announced Loop at the World Economic Forum in Davos, a global circular shopping platform built around durable, reusable containers. Tom is the author of 4 books, Revolution in a Bottle, Outsmart Waste, Make Garbage Great, and The Future of Packaging. And his work has been recognized by the United Nations, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Fortune, the World Economic Forum, and the Schwab Foundation. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So you have an interesting start to life. It started on the other side of the world, which is represented in wine corks behind the world behind you there. For those watching, it started in Hungary around the time of Chernobyl. You were a political refugee seeking, you and your family, political asylum for several years, and till age 4, like leaving at 4, 3 years traveling, adventuring, seeking the assistance of very kind people, and then landing in Eastern Canada at age 7. As I've learned about you and your life and the deep purpose and how you see the world, I'm curious as to how you see your beginning experience, life experiences shaping what you've been doing for the last 2.5 decades.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's not something I reflect on often. I think if I take that journey from effectively back then, Hungary was under the Iron Curtain, so sort of communist Hungary, if you will, to then later sort of forming my youth in Canada. I had this real privilege to go from these two very contrasting environments, and I think in Hungary, what I learned is that you can survive on absolutely nothing. Like we were very poor, but it didn't feel like it. It didn't feel bad. And you know what, that really gave me a lot in entrepreneurship, I think, because in entrepreneurship, you take risk. And I felt like there was no floor, like there was no worst case scenario, right? Like it didn't scare me. And I think not being scared of entrepreneurship failing is actually really, really helpful to being able to take those first steps. And, and I think growing up in effectively poverty, but not feeling like, felt like it would be totally fine life, not a problem. That I think really helped give that to me. And then that also, the contrast of growing or being born in a communist environment, but then growing up in a very entrepreneurial or capitalist environment. I mean, the essence of the American, and that's really the North American dream, is entrepreneurship. Rags to riches and all that. I fell in love with entrepreneurship. I think what Canada gave me was that, but also a deep love of environment. And to me, TerraCycle and everything I've done, since college has been about how do you bring purpose to entrepreneurship. That profit is not the purpose of business, but an indicator of health, and allows us then to go and do things that benefit different stakeholders, through business. And to me, that's how those things I think have come together to really create a direction in my life.
Well, and I heard the story of you seeing your first, you saw and found your first television in a dumpster, right? So
That's
the
yeah,
early recycling career, like back
yeah.
then.
Yeah, and just to put that into context, right? Like back in Hungary, and this is because it was under the USSR, and this is in the early 80s. I think kids in the early 80s were probably very similar vintage, you and I, like TVs were everywhere, right? I presume. But in Hungary, you had to apply to the government to be given the right to have a television set, which
Mhm.
means like no one had one. We didn't have one. And it would have been black and white, and it would have had like one or two, propaganda channels on it effectively. So it just didn't exist. And in Canada, and this is in like now they call it like, the early 80s. And these are these big, honking old, tube TVs. People in an apartment building were throwing them out when they got a new one. And like my dad and I were walking around, we'd never had the privilege of owning one. And we see them in the dumpsters. We pick up, one or two, and we think they're like, there's no way these can work. Plug them in. They work just fine and in color. And it was like, oh my God, like it's unbelievable the contrast in a land of abundance like North
Mm.
America versus a land of scarcity like Eastern Europe back then.
Such a contrast from not being able to have the option really to have one. And if you
Right.
did have one, there wouldn't be much freedom with one. To we got a new one. I mean, this is the begin. This is your whole this is your whole purpose. Like we got a new one, so let's just throw this one away. That
Right.
works perfectly fine.
Yes, yes. And think about how pervasive that is in our society today. Like, we don't cobble our shoes, we don't darn our socks, we don't repair electronics anymore. I mean, it is. I was, talking to a friend recently, and we're talking about like just home appliances and how dishwashers, or clothing washers, whatever, you'd buy one and it was there for your whole life and you could fix it and fix it. Today, they're not even fixable, really. Like the real answer is if some little switch is broken, well, throw the whole thing out and get a new one. And they're priced in a way that that is actually doable, because I think it's not just the nature of how things are constructed, it's also the nature of how much they cost relative to our income. I think, don't, like back in Hungary, we darned socks. I learned from my grandmother, like, how do you mend the hole in your sock, and you put
Mhm.
the sock onto some sort of mushroom looking wood thing, and you take the yarn and, or the thread, and you effectively patch up your sock. Well, I did that on the weekends. And, here, I think it's not that we don't want to, it's that a new sock is so cheap relative to our income that there's no purpose to do that. It's way
Mhm.
cheaper to go on Amazon and buy them for what, 2 minutes of labor hours.
And you, I learned through you that the whole idea of garbage didn't really exist until 1950, and
Isn't that
and
wild?
that is, it is wild. It's absolutely wild that that wasn't a thing. Um,
No, it's one of the most shock. I mean, the things that's fascinated with me about the topic of garbage is how many strange anomalies exist in it. And that one, it's how young it is one of them. I mean, and just to really dissect that, so like, anyone listening or watching, understands what I mean, right? Every organism has outputs that no other organism in its family can consume, right? Like a chimpanzee has what it puts in the toilet, and no other chimpanzee can eat that stuff. It would be bad. Or its body parts, hair, nails, whatever, it sheds during its life. And then its body at its inevitable end of life, and of course the carbon it exhales. And those things no other chimpanzee can consume. But they're very valuable, nutritious inputs to other organisms. And that's like the whole circle of life, right? That's how it works. So, one way to define garbage is something the generator doesn't want, but no one else wants either. And that idea only emerged in humanity in the 50s, because if you and I were talking in the 20s, or I mean, whatever, like 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, or just even 80 years ago, the clothing we'd be wearing would be all natural materials that, if one day couldn't be repaired anymore, you could throw it in the forest, you could litter it, and the forest would thank you because you added nutrients. The chair we'd be sitting on together would be made from wood and maybe some metal bits. Food, if we were having lunch right now, would have been all in its natural packaging, like its skin, if it was meat, or peels, if it was an apple or something. Today, all those same things, the chair we're sitting on, or anyone listening is sitting on, is all synthetic, amazing advanced materials. Our clothing is 60% synthetic. Our food is covered in packaging. And then just look around us, the volume of stuff and what it's made from. And there are no systems yet in nature. I really say yet because nature develops digestive systems for everything. It just takes like 100 million years to do so. So like it will digest the stuff, but it'll be well after we're all gone.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on. I'm a little older than you, so I was 10 in 1980, born in
Okay.
1970. So I'm reflecting on elementary school.
Yeah.
And I remember when littering became a thing, like no
Yeah.
littering, and
Yeah.
you get in trouble if you got caught littering. And I remember we would sometimes like try to get away with dropping a wrapper to see if we got caught, because it was just so much easier than going across the yard to the
Sure.
to the wastebasket. And so that was the beginning of, okay, this is a rule, but I don't understand it. And then there was a time in my life that not much later, I think probably adolescence, when I would see people litter and it would impact me. It was like I would get a pit in my stomach, the Coke can out the window of the car while people are driving. And I just imagine there's this process that you are continually on between introducing ideas, or just in humanity, introducing ideas as rules, and then the gap between when they're actually seen as important. A
Yes.
rule versus a value, maybe? Is that?
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. And isn't it interesting, by the way, in this whole, what they would call the circular economy, where you embed like recycling or reuse or littering or disposal. Anti-litter laws, which emerged around that time, right, are the only laws on good behavior within circular economy principles. Like, so for example, there is no law saying that if you have a Coke can, you have to recycle it if a bin is available versus dispose it. But that could be just as much a law as don't throw it on the ground, right? There's very little sort of rules and regulations, as a result. And I think the important dichotomy, right, that we have to be aware of is, up until really these materials that are useless to any other organism came onto the scene, advanced materials, and like plastics and so on, which was all in the 50s. You could litter. It would not be a problem, right? If you're 100 years ago on a horse and buggy, the horse can poop right on the road, not a problem. You could take your banana peel, throw it into the forest, not a problem. If you broke the wood wheel that the buggy was made from and you needed to replace it, you could throw that in the forest. Again, none of that littering was absolutely okay. It's that, and that was with us since the dawn of time. All animals litter. No animal does anything other than litter, right? It's the moment these advanced materials came onto the scene, that's when littering became a problem, because nature has no systems for them, so they pollute nature, right? They, cause harm, right, and all these issues, and that's so freaking modern. Like, it just happened. There's people alive, who were born before that existed.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And as I've listened to you talk about how garbage and waste is such a unique, it is such a unique problem, and it's huge,
Yeah.
and it's not sexy, and yet it there's so many opportunities for how we can improve upon our systems. And now, you know, um, upcycling, circularity. I mean, these are terms now that are becoming
Yeah.
part of our vernacular, to show that we're at the tip of the iceberg. But before we go to where we are now, I want to go back to Princeton,
Yeah.
because the origin story is a good one. Basically, discovering that worm poop would make marijuana plants grow is the
Yes.
of beginning of this whole thing.
It is. It is. That's exactly right. And then let's remember, this is 25 years ago, and the society's relationship to pot has matured greatly since then. But back then, if you remember, if you were around then, I mean, you were, but like if the listener was
Yes.
around, it was a bit more sketchy, you know. I mean, foundationally illegal everywhere, but everyone was enjoying it. And so, you know, in high school, when we sort of discovered pot, we had the bright idea of let's grow it. I mean, why not, right? And we sort of got this idea just as we were all going to college. And I figured I'm not going to take the plants to Princeton. I was a foreign student. I mean, I'm just lucky to get in. And so my friends took it to Montreal. But like dudes in 19, 20 years old have no idea how to garden, let alone indoors with hydroponics, which is way more difficult. And it was failing. And then one day, my friend Pete says, hey, come to Montreal and see the plants. And it was working. And the magic sauce, which I asked him about later, you know, was he was taking the kitchen scraps from his kitchen, feeding it to red worms, taking the worm poop, feeding it to the plants, and the plants were doing great. Now, if anyone who's listening is a gardener, they'd say, well, this is not unique, totally obvious, you know, that worm poop or worm castings would be the more professional terminology, is phenomenal. But for me, it was like a magic light bulb. And the part that was sort of interesting about that is not just that it solved the plants. I mean, that was awesome. And, you know, we celebrated that and so on, but that it was organic waste. And that was the first sort of introduction to the weirdness of garbage. And the first, you know, we talked about the weirdness of it's how old it is or young it is really as an idea. But the weirdness that caught me there was I was doing economics classes at the time. And, you know, in Econ 101, all you do is draw supply and demand curves, you know, and the general idea is if supply increases, price goes down. If demand increases, price goes up, and so on and so forth. But where would you draw the supply and demand of garbage? Went through my mind, you know, and I was like, wait a minute, it has phenomenal supply. Garbage is, I mean, here's a crazy stat. Like, if you think the supply of new diapers is high, the supply, every new diaper becomes a dirty diaper, and the supply of dirty diapers by weight is like 5 or 10 times the supply of new diapers, right? By definition. I mean, how crazy, right? So there's monster supply, but there's not just no demand, because that means you would take, say, dirty diapers or cigarette butts for free. There's actually negative demand, which means the only way that, like, you know, Dan, you would take dirty diapers, I presume, today happily from me is if I paid you to take them. And there'll be some magic number where you say, yeah, you know, $1,000 a bag, I'll happily take it, whatever. There'll be some number, you know, which means and that's no economic textbook explores the concept of negative demand. It doesn't exist. It's not discussed, which to me was like, oh my God, there's something here. And in fact, in some countries, that's the legal definition of garbage. In Japan, for example, the legal definition of garbage is a material that you are willing to pay to get rid of. Until then, it's not garbage, right?
I have not been to Japan. One of my kids did a summer program there last summer and was blown away about the lack of garbage, the lack of waste, and the rules about eating and where you can dispose of things. Sure. I mean, it was part of the culture, just totally part of the culture.
Yes, it is interesting, right? It's a culture that is incredibly clean, like cleaner than any country I've seen, but it is not that circular. The vast majority of waste, 80% of waste in Japan, is incinerated, which is burned, you know, typically with some modest energy recovery. So there's still a long way to go on how do we make sure that we honor those materials by making sure they cycle, you know, over and over. And in fact, the nice thing in Japan, there's a great culture of honoring durability, you know, honoring timelessness. And that's juxtaposed with this. It is the most packaged culture in the world. You know, you can buy a box of cookies and it's in 8 layers of packaging.
At what point in something else I didn't mention that everyone should know, you started your first company when the computers and technology started to boom. You're on the first to market there with a few different companies at age 14. Mm-hmm. Even had your first employee back then. So you were entrepreneurial, as you talked about, at a very young age.
I loved it, yes.
And I'm wondering where the purpose came in, because it's so clear by what you do. Purpose is at the core of it all.
Honestly, later, to be very fair to your question, at that high school age, it was all egocentric. It was my ticket to fame and fortune. You know, my every entrepreneurial idea was rooted in how do I make money, right? And that's the honest truth, you know, during that like sort of 14 to end of high school period. Purpose to me came very clearly in first year at university. And I think we're all a bit more utopian, you know, when we get to college, and it's our first time sort of really having agency, you know, we're not with our parents and all that. And I remember so clearly the turning point for me. It was also an economics class. And I didn't take a lot of economics classes. It just happened that, this all happened during a moment where I had been taking Econ 101. And the professor, opening class, gets up on stage. Opening question, opening class, freshman year, semester one, like we're talking way at the beginning, says, what's the purpose of business? Which is a truly reasonable opening question. And the answer she was looking for was maximize profit to shareholders. And to me, that left me unfulfilled. I really didn't like that answer. And I thought about it a lot. And where I got to was profit is important. Without it, you're dead. With it, you flourish. It's like health. Health is incredibly important. If we are unhealthy, we're not going to enjoy life and do anything. And if we're healthy, we're going to flourish and be able to really go out and make our mark. But is the purpose of life to be healthy? That's how business is defined. The purpose of business is to maximize profit to shareholders. And my thought was, no, you have to be healthy, critical, absolutely important, but it's not the purpose. Health enables us to go do things. And that to me was how I sort of brought it together, that the purpose of that profit is an indicator of health. And that then allows a company to go out and positively affect stakeholders. And stakeholders are certainly shareholders, but they're also employees. They're also customers. They're also vendors. And those are just human stakeholders. What about the non-human stakeholders, the flora and fauna? Like that's all. I think the ability for a business to positively affect all that is the key. And I think a business also has to be eyes wide open on what are its externalities. I don't think maliciously intended, but certainly unintended negative consequences on stakeholders for existing.
Had a previous guest, Raj Sisoria, who's one of the pioneer founders of the conscious capitalism movement.
Yeah.
And everything he talks about and everything they lead is what you do.
Yeah.
Right? It's really about like businesses everyone can win. Businesses can be profitable, employees can be well taken care of, customers can be happy, and the environment can be served. It's all possible, and your company is an example of that.
Yes, I certainly think it's very possible. But let's be fair. I think to the point is that there are, as a result, more things to steward for, right? Your plate is fuller, if you will, on the responsibilities you have. Because one of the things business, not individuals, but if business's goal is to maximize profit to shareholders, a really good way to do that is to eliminate the need to be responsible for externalities. And that perhaps is the summary of the sustainability crisis we live in, is not that actors are evil. I don't really believe that in evil people. I think it's very rare. It's almost like a disease, it's like super, super rare. But I do believe, and one of the big unlocking principles for us is really understand how chess pieces move, right? Like what is their pattern? What is their movement? And if business is defined as maximizing profit to shareholders, it will move to always do that. And a really key way to do that is to not be responsible for externalities and to avoid responsibility, to make sure it's regulated and legislated to not be responsible, and that's what's happened. Let's be clear, that has happened across the board. And it's why we are extracting more than we replenish. It's why we take, basically are in a credit system today with the planet.
So it takes a lot more work. It's a lot more responsibility. There's a lot more accountability.
Right.
And yet you choose it.
Yeah. Well, I do because it gives so much back. What I love about social, entrepreneurship or purposeful capitalism or eco-capitalism or, conscious capitalism, these are all synonyms of the exact same thing. But good capitalism is that not only do you get the rewards of traditional capitalism, fame and fortune, maybe a little less easier, but you still get those, like I have done well on those two fronts, but you also really feel good about what you do. And I think that is so important, that really pulls you through when it's challenging. And there's also business value to purpose. Journalists want to amplify you more. Companies open their doors more. There is business value there, right, as well. I think that it is incredibly fulfilling, right? And I don't think I could ever work in a business that didn't have that once I've tasted it, And that's why 25 years ago, I've never looked back. It's been fantastic,
We talk about in those college years, we open up and we get more progressive in our thinking, and for many people, that becomes the peak of that
Mm.
experience. It's something that you have a wave that you've been writing ever
Yeah.
since then.
Well, for me, what's been really cool is since then it hasn't stopped, except my paintbrushes have become bigger. Like that's what scale gives. That's what I really feel is like when we get bigger, we're now about $100 million company, maybe about 400 plus employees. That to me, the exciting part is my tools are bigger and grander. So when I have an idea, I can implement it faster and bigger than ever before. But it's always on the same theme, right? Because
Mhm.
that has been the unquestionable center point in what we do.
So the thinking of the entrepreneur, the thinking mind of the entrepreneur. You've already talked about one needs to be able to take risks, and
Yes.
part of your upbringing experience, which had contributed to that. The other, you mentioned the chess pieces, and
Yes.
I really liked that analogy that I've heard you talk about
Yeah.
too. Is being curious, and then how you related it to your kids as an example. Okay, 4 kids, everyone. Chess is big in the family. 4 young
Yeah.
kids, and Tom was talking about how his kids get frustrated because different, of course, you can only move in certain directions with different pieces, and it's a metaphor for you of how you do business, which
Yes.
is wanting to be curious about what all the levers are, what all the movements are, what all the
Yes.
mechanisms are, because when one approaches it curiously and then
Yes.
understands the game, one can work within the game instead of being frustrated and raging against it.
Yes. And I think I'm so glad you brought this example of because it is especially important in conscious capitalism. Because look, in all business, you have to work with other stakeholders, right? If you're, you have to convince consumers, or maybe you have to convince enterprises, you have to convince vendors, you have to convince employees, you have to convince all these stakeholders to like build your vision, right? No one can do it on their own. And the challenge, especially, is in what is, like if you're going to have a company do something good, right? Like, take care of, let's say you're, a sushi restaurant, replenish, for every fish you pull out, you put two back. Let's say you are a paper, company, you make greeting cards, for all the trees you cut down, you plant more, or whatever it will be. You care about climate change, species diversity, you pick the topic, and those are all environmental topics. They could be social topics, right? Doesn't matter. Every single thing that is good to do, if it's not being done today, it's not being done because there's cost. There's no example where that's not the case, because if there wasn't a cost issue, it would already be done, right? It would already be implemented. So you have to somehow get someone to put money on the table. And this is where the chess piece metaphor becomes really important. The big challenge is you get all these, as a social entrepreneur, false positives, because you're going to go into a company, like let's just say, theoretically, Dan's Sushi Company, we'll just make a really easy example. And let's say you are thriving and you're pulling out a lot of, let's say, especially big tuna and so on, and you're, having a great thriving sushi restaurant. And I tell you, hey, tuna is going to go extinct pretty soon. And, it would be really great if that for every tuna you pulled out, you put two back in to start replenishing, not just to be neutral, but to be positive. That's cost. There's a lot of cost there. And you get a false indication on how the chess piece moves, because you, as the proprietor, are not going to tell me, no, I don't care about tuna and I don't care about the topic. You're going to always approach it with nice, empathetic language. But the reality is, you still may not take out your checkbook and do it. And you might not do because you're bad. You might say, fuck, if I do it, the problem is, no, none of my competitors will do it. And I'm going to now have to sell sushi at twice the price and I'm going to go broke. So there's no way I could care, right? So first, the social entrepreneur is going to get false positive in the meeting. So they're always applauded and told how wonderful and so on, which is not a real indicator of what is really thought about. And if I then ask, how does the chess piece of a sushi restaurant work? It's as simple as it wants to sell more sushi more profitably tomorrow than today. That's the angle of how that chess piece moves. Now, on the surface, most social entrepreneurs will be like, oh, that's not that inspired. And they'll be annoyed by it. But that's like my little 5-year-old being annoyed that a pawn only moves forward, right? And then you're never going to win. But if you approach that chess piece empathetically and say, okay, I really understand how it moves, but I don't just understand it. I like empathize with how it moves. I really get it. Then I have a chance of winning. And maybe I can come in and say, okay, if I need to figure out how you're going to sell more sushi tomorrow than today with more profitability, because that's how the chess piece moves, and I want you to also replenish the oceans with fish, I got to figure out how you putting more fish back in the sea is going to increase your market share. And then if I unlock that, then I get you to care about my topic, which is replenishment of fish. And I've also really honored yours, and you're going to be applauding me all the way, and you're going to make it bigger tomorrow than today. And off it goes. And it expands, and it grows, and it flourishes, and it doesn't rely on you having to do me a favor.
Well, and this is a good bridge to one of your newer ventures of Loop.
Yes.
And why Loop is so successful in France, right?
That's exactly right.
So tell everyone the story, because it's an example of what you just
so
mentioned.
It needs a little backdrop, which is we've been around for 25 years, and our first 5 years were worm poop, and we grew a worm poop business. Then we pivoted 20 years ago to really focusing on recycling of hard to recycle materials, and we are now the world's largest cigarette butt recycler, or coffee capsules, or cosmetics, you name it. And 7 years ago, as we were, a thriving recycling business, we asked, is recycling the foundational solution to garbage? And we realized in that self-reflection, the answer is no. It's a solution to the symptom of waste, but not to the root cause of waste. So then that begs the question, what's the root cause? And we landed on disposability, on a throwaway lifestyle. It's not even the materials. It's not like plastic or metal. And yes, those are things that systems are not, natural systems don't exist for yet. But really the crux of it is we today buy 10 times more stuff than we did 75 years ago. It's insane. And that's because everything is in a throwaway. 99% of what we buy becomes garbage within the year of consumption, within the year of purchase. It's nuts. So if that's the issue, the solution is we must move back to reuse and repair, right? So that was our sort of thesis question. And so then, as a response, we launched a platform called Loop, which is basically focused on what you would look at as consumer packaged goods. Think like shampoo bottles to Coca-Cola, from Scotch to, Tide laundry detergent, that sort of stuff. And we said we need a platform where any brand can enter and enable a reusable version of its product, like now Tide in reusable packaging, and any retailer can sell it. And then a consumer, would buy it anywhere and return anywhere. The business, like the way it works in a retail environment today in France, is you can go into any supermarket, you'd see over 400 products. You could buy your Nutella, your Coca-Cola. You just pay a deposit every time you buy a package, like a propane tank here in the US. And then when you're done, you can drop it off, almost like a propane tank, at any retailer, get your deposit back, and then it's professionally cleaned, professionally refilled, and sold to someone else. And the concept of waste is gone. So that's the backdrop. Now, to answer your question, we loved this and we went nuts. It's been our biggest investment. We first launched pilots with the biggest retailers and biggest brands in Canada, US, UK, France, and Japan. Like, we put a lot of chips on the proverbial global roulette table. And long story short, it gained phenomenal success in France, and we couldn't get it out of pilot anywhere else. So the question was why?
Even though everyone liked it.
Yes,
even though everyone
this is so important.
Yes.
The data of like a French consumer to an American to a Canadian to a Japanese to a British, identical. You couldn't tell the difference. Consumers loved it. So this now comes down to the why. And the crazy part, it's everything to do with this chess piece. Because let's now take a consumer product brand, because it's not the consumer that was the issue, it was the brands. A consumer product brand, how does the chess piece move? It wants to make, the simplest answer is, it wants to make more money doing less work, right? Which is fair. More revenue with more profitability, because work is cost. And the best way to do that, if you're a consumer product company, is incrementality. What I mean by that is, if you're a shampoo company, the best thing you can do is invent conditioner. Because then your sales went from 1 bottle per person, I think it's about 33% of people use conditioner, to 1.33 bottles per person. And then when you've gotten society to start using conditioner, then you would invent treatment, which many of these companies done. And now you've gone to 1.4 bottles, because 10% of people use treatment, right? And so on. Or if you are toothpaste, you invent mouthwash, your laundry detergent, fabric softener. I mean, you get the idea. It's why there's 15,000 different varieties of cleaner, when all-purpose cleaner would just be fine for any surface, right? But cleaning companies realize you put some food coloring and you call it a different derivative, people will buy 2 cleaners instead of 1. So anyway, that's
just like vodka that has a different color.
Sure.
It's like it's just a
Exactly.
different color. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
God. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
But then if you're a vodka company and suddenly you have 15 different flavors, you get way more shelf space, way more
Yep.
incrementality. Now here's the problem is that's how the chess piece moves. Now, if I go to a company and say, hey, I want to make your ice cream container not disposable as it is today, but reusable, there is no incrementality, right? I'm not going to get the consumer to buy 2 ice creams instead of 1. They will just buy the reusable instead of the disposable. And that is very then difficult to get a company to want to get behind if it's extra work. Because the reusable offering is always going to be empirically more work than the disposable, because you have to be at minimum aware that that package is coming back after being used, and you have to have more health and safety muscles. You might have to design the package differently, so on and so forth. Now, the other crazy part about all of this is that they can't, it's very difficult to be truly honest about that. That's why you get, as I said, in social entrepreneurship, a lot of false positives, because right now the consumer good ecosystem, these producers, have a gun to the head from people like Greenpeace and others who say recycling is not the answer. Greenpeace goes as far as to say recycling is broken, it's not going to work. I think that's a bit extreme, but nevertheless, that's Greenpeace's mantra. And that reuse is the answer. And the company can't say, well, we don't care about reuse. It'd be like sacrilege. You can't say those words, right? So they have to say, oh, no, we care, right? So much it hurts, we care. So the brands are in this impossible situation where they are being asked to do something not in the way the chess piece moves. And that's why in France, what happened was the regulatory environment, which is a forcing of the chess piece to move a certain way, was there. There's laws that say reuse must be, implemented, and subsidies to help. But the bigger point beyond you just have to wait for regulation was, what could we do, right? And we realized a real breakthrough in this big challenge, which is if the chess piece wants more profit and wants incrementality, and we cannot provide incrementality, then we need to make the effort zero. Because if we can take the effort to zero, then there's no reason not to do it. And as mentioned, earlier in the discussion, I don't believe in evil people. I think everyone wants to do the right thing. So if you can go to a company and say, you can now eliminate waste and there's no effort, okay, sure, no incrementality, but if there's no effort, then okay, off we go.
So how'd you do that?
Yeah.
How'd you do that?
So originally in Loop, we would go to companies and say, hey, Tide, you should take your plastic, orange bottle and make it into this gorgeous stainless steel reusable container. And how cool would that be? Or Haagen-Dazs and other, really
cool
brand.
I heard you made it a brilliant, beautiful Haagen-Dazs.
Oh my God, like museum quality.
Yeah.
And not just that, Cascade, Clorox wipes. I mean, all these things, museum quality, like unbelievable. And we realize it's the wrong way to go. Today, the way we do it, and it works amazingly well, is when a consumer product company comes and says, I want to look at this, we evaluate all their packages. And we look for the ones that can be reused with no change, no extra work, nothing. And if you think about it, there's a lot of packages that are way over designed. A Scotch bottle, a perfume bottle, a wine bottle, even a laundry detergent bottle, and so on and so forth, a pickle jar, are way over designed for one use. Way over designed. They could easily be cleaned and refilled dozens and dozens of times. So today, when you go to the shelves in France, you'll notice the packages that are in the reuse system through Loop look totally like the normal ones, because they're the exact same thing. Now, that doesn't mean it works for everything. It works about for a third of consumption, which is still a massive, market. But when we took the work down to zero, it flourished. And that's why that chess piece metaphor is everything. Because if we would say, no, you got to do a lot of extra work, you got to reinvent your packaging, implement new production lines, all this stuff, it would always be stuck in pilots that go nowhere. And, it would never be able to do what it's been able to do in France. And that's what I always tell folks when they enter TerraCycle, or, is really focus not on your utopian dream of how you hope chess pieces move. Because when you leave college into a job, you're going to feel like, oh, I would love that every company is super benevolent and only cares about these altruistic things. Instead, really learn and then empathize with how it moves. Don't be angry, because you might be. Don't. Be empathetic, and then you can play the game.
What drives you?
Gosh, I have one barometer in my life, which is when it's over, I hope that the world, all the different sort of stakeholders lament my loss and wish I was around a little longer, versus the exact opposite, which is say, thank God this guy's gone and it could have happened sooner. And I try to live my life so that that becomes true.
Mm. Back to the purpose and the meaning.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And, to me, like, resource, money, whatever, is just a way to accelerate that, to amplify that, right? Like, and that was the beauty. You asked it at the beginning, like what Hungary and living in, like, really objectively, like, on like a few dollars a day type income and being happy
Mhm.
is that there is no scenario of whatever wealth I have that would be a problem.
Yeah, what a gift in
It
a
really is.
yeah.
Because I see in my friends who maybe have grown up in Toronto and so on, where they wouldn't share that perspective. They would be more scared about failing. But there is no fear from my end because honestly, there's no floor. There's no scenario that wouldn't be okay.
Hmm. I mean, that is a liberating way to live.
It helps. And you know what's great is that it actually self-fulfills that doesn't happen because then you can really play, and by really playing, you're able to then even have access to greater success. Sort of an ironic outcome.
So this is is an interesting challenge. Spent a lot of my career working in the parenting space,
Yeah,
and also when I think of my own experiences, and my father, for example, grew up with not many means, and the stories where he was the guy with like one shirt that when it wore out, his mom would turn the collar around the
sure.
opposite way, before the
Yeah,
1950s. And so he grew up with not a lot, and there were he describes a lot of his life as very happy just because of
yeah,
the family and the friends. And then him wanting better for us
yes,
financially and
yes.
creating better for us. And then we grew up in a very different environment than he grew up. And then as our kids now, and you see the generations, how does one instill the same value system that
Yes.
one came from to your kids who are growing up in a, an environment with more resource?
Yeah, it is.
It's a challenge, right?
Oh God, yes. I
Yes.
struggle with this very deeply. I have not figured it out because I almost say, and it's the wrong words, but you'll get the spirit. It's like, how do you give the gift of pain?
Hmm.
And because
Right.
it wasn't painful, it's the wrong word. I was going to say the gift of suffering, but it also wasn't suffering.
Right.
But how do you give the gift of
Hardship, difficulty.
hardship? That's a way better word.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you for that. And it's so difficult because the
Mhm.
parent, we don't want to give hardship. And it's also very difficult to give because it will be perceived by the child as taking away, you
Yes.
know? And
Yes.
so and I really don't have the answer, to be fair, but my
Right.
closest musing with it is to show them love, you know, that you can be, like thriving in any environment, right? Like, and show that to them through example. The challenge is if one is successful, then your environments are very privileged. And you're not always floating in non-privileged environments.
This is the challenge.
It
This
is.
really is the challenge, and it just goes to show, we have our DNA. There's nature, there's nurture,
Yeah.
and there are, I would say, even beyond nurture, the environmental circumstances and
Yes.
geographic circumstances by which
Yeah.
one just happens
Yeah.
to find themselves.
Yes. And look, I think one, approach here is even if you are floating in privilege, maybe it's about how do you have a can-do attitude towards any challenge, that you can find solutions in any environment, that you don't, that you see value in everything. These things might help, but I was more lucky in my upbringing than my kids are on that particular vector.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
Do
And you
you?
can't like
Yeah.
tour it, you know what I mean? You could
No.
only have lived it authentically. Like
Yes.
I remember like the examples for me for poverty, like, and it's not poverty in the sense of, living on the street type poverty, but like being just with very little means. Like, examples would be like, I mean, of course, darning socks and, and all that, or not having really, much physical things. But it was also, like when, grandma in Budapest would, fry up whatever on the frying pan, all that like oil and grease would go into a container, and that was the butter the next day, things like that, right? Or just really valuing everything and not wanting to throw anything away and getting, doing something with it. Or, I mean, I still remember like when we landed in Canada, like when we go to restaurants, my dad, he would always look at the price of the meal on the menu and would think through what's the best deal, which was crazy when we discovered all you can eat, which is like a uniquely North American thing, because he would be like, okay, we're pre-gaming. We're going to go to this all you can eat place tomorrow for lunch, which means like starting after lunch the day before, there's no food. Then you're going to eat as much as you can, so there's going to be no dinner the next day. I mean, it became sort of a joke, but like it was true, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, but again, it's just sort of the nature of that experience.
Life is so fascinating how it informs us, and it's important for everyone to hear that the idea of not being afraid. I mean, because fear. I mean, well, there's evolutionary fear. Like we need fear to survive.
Sure.
We need to survive the saber-toothed tiger and the modern day equivalent. We have our amygdalas for that. But I guess putting fear aside, it's anxiety, it's worry.
Yes.
That's what we're really talking about here, is how much that limits us and limits the possibility. And if we could put that aside and know we're going to be okay,
Yeah.
like somehow we're going to be okay, you're unleashed, right? You're
Oh,
it's like
that's
freedom
everything.
to
Yes.
go for it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, I think anxiety is a real ball and chain, right? Now, there's value to anxiety, right? It's not a completely pointless concept, but we have to be aware on how much it binds us,
Hmm.
you know?
So do you ever, I mean, I know you run up against some pretty tough chess situations.
Sure.
And adversaries, and some kinder than others, and some,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
less flexible than others. Do you ever have those sleepless nights? And I'm not talking
Yeah.
sleepless nights about your mind is trying to figure out the winning move.
Yes.
But in terms of, you ever been pushed to that situation for a certain reason?
Yeah, no, like the anxious situation, not
Yes.
that I'm
Yes.
gonna like, because in 90% of the time, it's much more, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna
Exactly.
figure out how
I
to
get that.
take that
Yeah.
and turn it, and that's where like, and that's actually a pretty fun place in a way, even if there's lots of stress and lots of consequence. It's sort of cool because you get amazing ideas that come up. I think I've been, the lowest moments for me because have been, this is harder than, that's what I said overall. Social conscious capitalism, because you're stewarding for more things, is objectively harder than just go out and make money, right? And it's one of those things where you see you put all this effort into the organization and it's growing. Like
Hmm.
$100 million company is nice, but man, if it wasn't like a social conscious business, I probably could have taken it to $1 billion by now. Like, so you're
Yeah.
putting in that sacrifice. You're really caring, and pushing. And one of the challenges sometimes is that there is, in the environmental movement, it's gone from sort of anything is good, then sort of Greta and everyone came onto the scene, trust the science, and that was good. But then, like a few years after that, there's a lot of anger, and the anger is manifested in like the world of recycling, is articles like, well, recycling is a hoax, or recycling is a con of the oil industry, or it's like this sort of thing. And it's challenging because, for journalists, chess piece again, journalism has moved to be valued just on clicks. It used to be valued very differently, right? But today, it's valued on, I'm sure that like the way, we value this discussion, if it's like a traditional sort of podcast, is how much engagement did it get, right? I mean, fair. And the anger gets a lot of engagement. And then, being sort of, caught up in that, it's very tough, right? And that would be, those examples, which have happened to us in a few times, they're very difficult. The biggest thing I would say, though, right, is what I've learned about dealing with challenges overall is I can take away that feeling by focusing on like, what's the tuition, what's the learning out of it, what are we going to do, like what was the positive we can get out of it so that we're better tomorrow than when we had faced that. And that has been very helpful to that sort of moment.
Hmm. I wrote down something you said, which you just led us there, which is, when we start feeling stable, I start feeling anxious. And I
Yes.
thought that's that entrepreneurial,
Oh,
right?
it totally is.
That
I'm not
edge.
good at like stable, like that's cool. Don't get me wrong, but like it's itchy, gets itchy, and you want to like think about how do you push, how do you grow, what's next. That's how Loop came up, because we were feeling very stable in recycling, and the answer was, okay, we got to go well beyond, because that's stability is sort of like a privilege, but like I don't want to hang out there. You know, I want to use that stability to be able to go to the next step.
So what is the next step? Like what you know, what I know you're always looking ahead, and I know you've purchased some companies recently. So like where are you
we've
going?
done 4 acquisitions. We have another one we're announcing in a month from now. So yes, we are in the business of buying companies, which is really buying more capability, expansion. There's generally in entrepreneurship, you have organic expansion, which is, through your own resource, and inorganic where you're buying companies. We do both. For me, what I would say is that the big focus is how do we really thicken our footprint, be able to really collect and recycle more volume, and then really take the success in France on reuse and expand it to other countries. We just signed some contracts with British retailers. We're talking to retailers in Norway and other countries, so we can really take reuse to the next level and be able to grow the impact of both recycling and reuse.
And I want to highlight your differentiator because we didn't spend a lot of time on it. You mentioned cigarette butts, you mentioned dirty diapers, and so everyone, this is what they're famous for, which is taking the stuff that nobody could even imagine wanting to recycle and doing it and finding a way with the chess pieces for all of the stakeholders to get involved to make it happen.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So if you go to, I'll give a little promotion here. If you go to the TerraCycle website, you'll notice in 20 countries now you can go there. And in the world of recycling, you'll see a lot of free programs. Please use those first, of course. And those are all funded by conscientious brands and retailers, who are funding the recycling of things that are otherwise not recyclable. Or if you don't find free programs, there's paid solutions as well that you can purchase to recycle just about anything. And the important note here is the real breakthrough in recycling things that are not recyclable is understanding why something isn't recyclable. And it's not because it can't be. It's just because it costs more to collect and process than the results are worth. That's the real issue. And this is getting worse and worse every day because the biggest mega trend in object design is to make something cheaper tomorrow than today. That's how we're able to consume such a ferocious amount of stuff, is that every day it's cheaper relative to our income to buy things. Look at what's, in fashion, it's gone from like H&M to, what is, other fast fashion like Shine and Temu and so on. That's all about that garment is cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, which makes it more disposable. So that's the world TerraCycle plays in. And our reuse division Loop, not yet in North America, but if you're in Europe, especially France, you should completely check it out. It's really fun.
We'll close with a quote and then a comment. The quote is, make sure whatever you're working on is not just for the sake of becoming wealthy, and it will get you through any of the difficult questions and moments. Purpose, right? You always go back to the purpose of what you are doing as that guiding light.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's the nucleus and it's something to hold on to fiercely. And it's something you can really build a lot around. For us, it's eliminate the idea of waste. Are we ever going to do that? In my lifetime, probably not, but I hope to have, done as much as I possibly humanly could to further that goal. And it's an amazing adventure along the way.
Well, I certainly have been thinking a lot about this conversation, and you have changed the way that I look at use and disposability. And I was talking to my wife about this last night, and talking about the show, and we started going through our lifestyle and our use, and took pride in our kids, who I think some of the newer generations have this more inbred than those of us that came through the whole trash disposability movement, and how much opportunity there is for all of us to make micro or macro adjustments, and the global impact is just, it's endless.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. All right, you mentioned the website. Say it again. Tell everyone where they can find out your programs. And the free, you were mentioning basically the box program. So you could say
yes, absolutely. So go to TerraCycle, TerraCycle, so TerraCycle.com. Check out the free programs. Check out the paid programs. Lots of different choices that you can see there. And then you can also click on our reuse section to learn what we're doing in the world of reuse.
Awesome. Thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for making a big difference.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Tom is driven by purpose and is an example for all of us to do the same. Here are 5 key takeaways from this conversation. Number 1, garbage is not a permanent part of human history. It's a relatively new consequence of disposable culture. Number 2, profit is not the purpose of business. It is a measure of the health that enables business to do good. Number 3, real change happens when we understand how the chess pieces move and work with systems instead of fighting them. Number 4, fear of failure shrinks when you truly believe that no matter what happens, you'll be okay. And number 5, eliminating waste begins with small choices, but it requires a larger shift in how we value everything we use. This conversation has left me thinking about what I use, what I buy, and what I do with it on a regular basis. Something for us all to be considering as we walk through life. We are interested in what you think about this episode, so please feel free to leave us a comment at Dr. Dan Peters on Instagram or reply to any of our social posts. Thank you for listening, for being a part of this amazing community, for your 5-star reviews, and for subscribing. Please do share this show with anyone and everyone you think will benefit. And as always, we have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Uplifting Folk by Awesome Music. Artwork by Kelly Dwyer. Follow us on social media at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, visit drdanpeters.com.